Hello and welcome to Creative Sparkle. My name's Holly and today we're doing an art journal prompt list, so grab your art supplies and let's get crafting. Hello and thank you for joining me today. So working in a recycled book, but there's no need to prime because the first prompt is to use envelopes to cover your background. So as we're covering the background completely, we won't need to prime the page because you won't be able to see any of it. So I'm just using a normal Pritt stick and some envelopes that I have in my stash, just something recycled from earlier. If you want to use something different, you don't have to use what I'm using. Envelopes can be whatever you've received in the post. You can just cover up the address, or you can use whatever you have in your stash, any type of envelope. It doesn't have to be as plain as the one that I'm using. You could have some interesting envelopes in your stash, so you just use what you have available to you and cover the page if you can, and if not, then that's fine. You could use plain paper or some scrapbook paper. If you don't have envelopes, don't worry, there is always something else you can use. It's not a mandatory rule that you have to follow each prompt exactly. You just use what you have available to you. So as you can see, I'm not just simply sticking the envelopes down, I'm tearing them up and folding them this way and that so that we've got a bit of a difference in the texture of the page and the colours that are coming through as well. So it's not just a plain enveloped background, but if that's what you want to do, then you just stick them down however you want. I just fancied a bit more of an interesting texture, so that's how I was feeling today, so that's what I went for. So once we're happy with the envelopes, we'll move on to prompt number 2, which is to use white or clear gesso to prime. I've decided to use white gesso, but I am watering it down so we can still see the texture and the pattern in the background. So if you want to use white or clear gesso, whatever you feel is best for your page, for your envelopes, or if you don't have gesso, for example, you could use white acrylic paint or even another acrylic paint if it's easier for yourself to use that. Just use what you have available to you to prime your page. So once we've finished priming, we'll move on to prompt number 3, which is to use a wipe to apply a medium of your choice. So I've started with the banana colour in gelato, and I just scribble it on the page and then use a wipe to spread it across the page. So as you can see, the colour is quite vibrant, and the wipe that I'm using leaves some space for the background to come through a little bit more as well. Unfortunately, the yellow I thought was just a little bit too bright for me. If you prefer that brightness, then you go for that. But I've decided that I wanted to try a darker colour, so I did get some chocolate brown paint that you can see here. And again, I'm using the baby wipe to apply it, sticking with the prompt. And obviously I've added 2 mediums now, but that's okay. It's just whatever you feel is best for your page, and that's what I've gone with. So the brown I think is a little bit of a better texture, but the yellow is still coming through from behind that brown as well. So prompt number 4 is to add some postage stamps to your layout, recycled or stamped, etc. So the stamps that I've decided to use, I did receive on envelopes from my Auntie T from Spain, most of them. So you can see that they're all random stamps and each one of them has come on an envelope from my Auntie T. So thanks to her for that. So obviously you can tell that the postage is the theme of today's page, but if you don't have stamps, then use what you have available to you. You could stamp them whatever you have. So in prompt number 5 is to add some interest to your page relating to post or travel. So I have this stamp set that is related to travel in general, and I've just decided to choose a few from this stamp set, and I'm going to be using them just to stamp over the background. So I have this map style one, and I'm using archival inks in the colour coffee, and I will also use sepia for one of the other stamps as well. So I'm just going to stamp those over the background, and you can see the next stamp is going to be the image that gets stamped on your envelope when you've sent it and other things as well. So this is the kind of thing that if you don't have a stamp available from the previous prompt, you could use something like this instead, or some other kind of ephemera that looks like it's postage themed. So whatever you have available to you, I always say that, I know, I'm sorry, but whatever you have available to you and whatever suits your page. So once we're done with that prompt, we'll move on to prompt number 6, which is to add a focal image relating to your previous prompt. So the focal image that I've decided to use, I'm going to use this mini paper and this stamp here, and I'm just going to use a square of that paper. It is quite small, and I'm going to use that sepia ink again just so that the colours are cohesive across the page. And I'm also going to use the coffee just to add a bit of shadow on the stamp, so I'm just going to add some of that coffee onto the stamp where I think it would look good and stamp that on as well. I know it's not necessarily travel related. I think it does give a kind of globe effect, but I think it just suited the page well. So, you know, the rules are your own. So I'm going to, once I've finished stamping that image, you can see the shadows are clearly there. And then I'm going to take that piece of paper and distress the edges with my distress tool that I have, or you can do that with scissors, or even with your fingers. You could just tear it, whatever you want to do. You don't have to distress your focal image at all. You could do it however you want to do it. So once I've distressed the edges, I'm going to use a distress ink and go over the edges as well for that, and then I'm going to stick that down onto the page just with some simple school glue or PVA glue, whatever you call it. So once you have your focal image stuck down or added to the page, you can just make sure that it's cohesive with the page, and once you're happy with that, we'll move on to the next prompt. So as my focal image is down, we'll move on to prompt number 7, which is to create a border for your layout. So I'm again using that same paper that I had from the small papers, and I'm going to use the distress tool that I used earlier for my focal image and distress the edges, and use the same ink again just to go over those distressed edges. And then I'm going to stick that all around the edges of my page, and that will create my border. I was thinking of doing some stamping over the top of that paper, but I thought it just went well with what I was working with, so I decided against that option. If you want, you can do stamping, or you can just do a shadowed border. Do whatever kind of border you feel is appropriate to the page that you've created so far. And if you don't feel like you want to do something that I've done, please don't feel like you need to, because the prompts are there just to give you a guideline. So I'm just sticking that down with, again, PVA school glue, and once that's stuck down, we can move on to prompt number 8. So prompt number 8 is to add a title to your page using the same medium as step 7. So I've gone with that same stamp set that I used earlier, and again with the paper, because that's the medium that I used for the previous prompt. And I'm going to stamp the image of the signpost thing that you can see here using the same inks that I've used on the background as well. And getting that stamped down, my title is going to be on those pieces of wood that you can see sticking out for the signs, and it's just going to say "Send it my way." So a word on each of those planks there. So I'm just going to cut that out and then pop distress ink on the edges just to get rid of any of that white, and put that on the page with the same glue again. If you wanted to add a title in a different way, you can add it directly onto the page. Feel free to do so. I seem to be feeling the papers today. That seems to be what I'm going with. So at the moment I'm just popping that ink down, the distress ink that I've used for the edges of the focal image and the border, and I'm just getting some of that excess away just so that it fits with the stamped image a bit better. So for the title itself, I'm just using a brown felt tip pen, and I think it fits with the page quite well, and it's very mystically Alice in Wonderlandy. So prompt number 9 is to add some related ephemera to your page for interest. So the ephemera that I've chosen to add are mini envelopes that I used a die cut to cut out, and I've used the same paper again that I've been using across the page. And once I've cut them out, you can see that I'm just distressing the edges with that ink, and then I'm just going to stick those down on the page. So ephemera can be anything that you have that's going to suit your page, so I hope to see what you've been using. So the 10th and final prompt is to add anything to your layout for a finishing touch. So what I decided to do, because I put those envelopes down, I have done this before if you followed the prompt list videos, I'm going to use the wax seal stamp, but instead of using a normal sized one, because I have mini envelopes, I'm going to add those with the burning tool stamps that I have. So they're metal, so they're still going to work the same. And I just need to pop a tiny little bit of wax on there and then let that sit in there for a moment, so I've got that little pattern. So I'm going to do that on all of my envelopes, and that is my finishing touch. So I hope you enjoyed today's page. Please do like this video if you enjoyed it, and subscribe and share the video. If you do decide to take part in the prompt list, I would love to see your creations, so please do tag me on Instagram with the hashtag #SparklePrompts, and I will see you next time, where we will turn your creative spark into creative sparkle. Thanks. Bye.